Many of the headlines about the Me Too movement tell stories of women who worked in ostensibly glamorous fields, the movies, and the media. Less often heard are the stories of women alleging harassment in more workaday locations. Here's Erin Moriarty.
He would make comments on my body and other workers' bodies saying like, I would have sex with you, I wouldn't have sex with her.
First it was like, oh, you have nice hair, start touching my hair. And then it was like physical when he actually started grabbing my butt.
Any woman that he could get his hands on or be near, he was taking advantage of that moment.
Young women from across the country with remarkably similar accounts of workplace abuse and harassment at one of America's largest fast food restaurant chains.
It kind of made me feel isolated. I kind of thought that I was just the only one this is happening to right now. You know what I'm saying? So I just felt completely alone.
Kimberly Lawson, Jamelia Fairley, Kat Barber, and Emily Annabal have all either filed discrimination charges or filed suit against McDonald's corporate restaurants or their independently owned franchises. Each tells a story of persistent and unwanted harassment from male coworkers.
The tongs that we used to make the food, he'd use those to grab my breasts.
Did he do that when it was just the two of you, or did other people see this going on?
He didn't try to hide it at all. It was in front of everybody.
It is hard to believe that in this day and age that it's still happening this egregiously, this out in the open.
Jillian Thomas is a senior attorney with the ACLU. She says hundreds of female employees have been subjected to sexual harassment at McDonald's restaurants, as described in as many as 100 lawsuits and charges of discrimination.
The other piece that's especially shocking at McDonald's, which of course bills itself as America's best first job, is how young the victims are. 15, 16, 17 years old.
So you're not saying this only happens at McDonald's?
Oh, far from it. The food service industry generally is one of the worst for sexual harassment claims.
Last year, in a survey of nearly 800 female workers at McDonald's restaurants and franchises, 3/4 said they were harassed at work. In that same survey commissioned by unions, a majority said that they suffered consequences for reporting the behavior. But a company spokesman disputes the findings, saying the sample size was too small and not consistent with what we're seeing in McDonald's restaurants. And yet, there are stories like Jamelia Fairley's.
After I reported my harassment, they gave me 11 hours to 15 hours, and I couldn't work with those hours. It wasn't enough. It wasn't helping me keep my place.
In late 2018, Fairley, then 24 years old and a single mom, was working at a corporate-owned McDonald's in Florida when she says a new coworker began making lewd comments and touching her.
When he first touched me, I told him to keep his hands to himself. Like, don't touch me.
And what was his reaction when you said that?
He thought it was a joke.
Did other people see this happening?
Yes, and he was doing it to other women at my McDonald's as well. I wasn't the only one.
Fairley reported the behavior to both the supervisor and the general manager. And yet she says that didn't end the offensive behavior.
It even got worse to the point where he pushed me, like he grabbed me into his grown area. Managers were standing there watching him do it, and they didn't do nothing about it.
He was eventually transferred to another store, she says, but not until Fairley reported another incident with a different coworker.
This particular comment, he like really made me really upset because he had asked me how much would it be to have sex with my daughter at the time, and she was only 1 year old. So
that employee was fired. Fairley stayed. She says she needed the job
so that I could provide a roof over her head.
And that's why now is the right time to have this conversation.
In this corporate video, McDonald's new CEO says the company wants to be a leader when it comes to values.
We do the right thing for the right reasons. I love that phrase because it hits you in the gut. Everybody knows what it means to do the right thing.
In late 2019, the company did put out an extensive new policy for dealing with sexual harassment in its corporate stores. But 95% of McDonald's are independently owned franchises, and there the policy is only a resource, not a requirement. And this is how some past employees describe the sexual harassment training they received.
My orientation was a lady. She sat across from me. She had a stack full of papers. She said, here, we're going to run through this really fast.
Kimberly Lawson worked at a McDonald's franchise in Kansas City in 2017 and 2018.
I need you to just sign and date everything so we can get this done.
Do you know whether you signed something that did list the policy having to do with complaints like sex harassment and what you do if you do encounter it?
I have no idea.
We heard the same story over and over again.
I never got taught any training on that at all.
I don't remember any training on that or hearing about that.
There was a page in the policy book that I signed, but no one, went through it with me.
So a policy that's on a piece of paper stuck in a handbook that is never actually lived in the work environment is worthless.
Which may be how a worker in a McDonald's franchise in Mason, Michigan, was able to harass colleagues there for years.
This is a case where there was a serial harasser, a serial predator.
Eve Cervantes is an employment lawyer suing McDonald's and the franchise.
He harassed, every woman who was there, basically.
Emily Annabelle was 17 years old when she went to work at that McDonald's in April 2016 and encountered Sean Banks, a shift manager.
How often would he be making comments or touching somebody?
Pretty much every shift, for most of the shift.
Did you think you just had to put up with it?
Yeah, that was kind of the environment I think that was built at that restaurant, is that this is normal, and if you don't like it, then you can leave.
She finally did leave in the spring of 2017. 5 months later, when Kat Barber, then 18, started working there, Banks was still a manager.
He used to call me a bitch, ugly, I was fat. I told him to stop.
And would he?
No, he would. If anything, it made him persist more.
Barber says she reported the behavior to the general manager.
I normally would either get a laugh, get told that I was being dramatic.
In September 2018, she too quit her job.
In the end, what made you leave?
It was way too much to watch not only others get sexually harassed, but also get sexually harassed. It was causing such an impact in my life personally. Even when I was looking for new work, I was having anxiety about whether someone at that work was going to be sexually harassing me.
Sean Banks did not respond to our request for an interview. The owner of the franchise, through an attorney, declined to answer written questions.
Isn't this just a matter of one bad apple?
It's really not about one bad apple. The problem is not just that you have a harasser, it's that you have a harasser who was not being stopped.
After Annabelle and Barber, along with several other women, filed suit, the franchise owner sold its stores.
McDonald's could say, how are we going to be able to monitor the environment in every single one of these McDonald's?
First of all, McDonald's actually does impose a great deal of control on its franchises. You go to McDonald's anywhere in the country, they manage to have the exact same hamburgers and fries. So they do actually have a lot of control. So McDonald's Corporation could certainly be training these general managers about sexual harassment and about how to handle it.
In its statement to CBS News, McDonald's says that it makes training available to its franchisees and has made a hotline available for all franchisees to provide to their employees. If McDonald's is held liable in the cases filed by these women, the damages may not be substantial. None was making more than $14 an hour. But in a job that some see as inconsequential, Jamelia Fairley says she is finally being seen and heard.
Do you have regrets sometimes about complaining?
No, I have no regrets about complaining at all. I feel like I stood up for myself. I stood up for my daughter. I stood up for other women who he was bullying. I feel like I was making a difference.